There are an exact number of 0 total things in this universe that makes an Assassin's Creed fan happier than bitching, moaning, and lamenting about what could have been within this franchise. Every single Assassin's Creed fan has their ideal game, their ideal trilogy that they would have made if they had their hands on Ubisoft and had Ubisoft's budget. Everyone knows how they would direct a team to make the Assassin's Creed that they think is missing from this franchise, the installment that would take it back to the golden age. And I am an Assassin's Creed fan, which is why today I'm going to make this video more for me than for anyone else. I don't know who will be interested in this. It's less of a discussion video and more of a random rant about a trilogy that I think Ubisoft should have made that they kind of made a huge mistake not making. Especially because now there's no real chance to make it ever again. We always dream, for example, about Ubisoft going back to make a sequel to Assassin's Creed Unity where Shay and Arno meet and Connor helps Arno defeat Shay. Things like that even though it's almost guaranteed that it's not going to happen, one can hope and dream because there's no real narrative reason as to why that couldn't happen. There's a lot of lore still left unsaid in that time period during Assassin's Creed that we can still explore. So in a certain alternate universe, Ubisoft could 100% go back, not retcon anything, and still make a great installment following Arno's story. However, this basically trilogy that I had always dreamed about making if I ever got my hands on Ubisoft and, fired everyone and rehired again, is a trilogy that cannot be made anymore because it's a trilogy that revolves around one character that most Assassin's Creed fans can recognize. That character is Xiao Jun. Now, for those who might not know because you're newer Assassin's Creed fans or just didn't get too much into the lore around Ezio, Xiao Jun is a Chinese assassin who basically trained under Ezio, and we play as her in a small side game called Assassin's Creed Chronicles. Which, by the way, if you're a stealth fan and like playing stealth games, you should definitely play that game. I think it's very underrated. It's not a AAA game, it's not an open world game, but it's a very, very good stealth game. In my opinion, it has the most consistent stealth in the franchise given its small scope because it is a 2.5D game. That game was made for Xiao Jun and told her story after training with Ezio. And I think there's a novel that came out recently that kind of tells the story of her entire life. Which is why I say that this trilogy, even if now I did get my hands on Ubisoft, I could never make because I'd have to retcon so much important lore that Ubisoft committed to over the past decade. So instead, what I decided to do was go on my small YouTube channel and tell you exactly what I would have done with the character of Xiao Jun once she was introduced to us in Embers. So to get it out the way, we all know our ideal gameplay. The community that we fostered, the people that tend to watch these videos and interact with each other, we all tend to have a very similar taste in Assassin's Creed games. So it's no surprise to tell you that most of my gameplay influence would come from Assassin's Creed Unity. It would take a lot of city design from Assassin's Creed Unity, a lot of stealth design from Assassin's Creed Unity, and then I'd have a huge open world in between the dense cities inspired by Assassin's Creed Origins, and I think the parkour would be more similar mechanically, not in terms of animations, but mechanically with Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. So gameplay-wise, it's not a very interesting discussion because I think that's a discussion that's been had multiple times. Everyone already knows kind of quote-unquote the perfect blend between all the Assassin's Creed games. What I want to discuss here is kind of the story that I would have wanted to tell and how that would have impacted a bit more innovation in the gameplay to take from other IPs. So the trilogy actually wouldn't start with Xiao Jun. It would start with a man in the Chinese Brotherhood who is, by the time that we start playing as him, a master assassin. He's a stoic man, a quiet man, and one that's very focused on his mission. He doesn't want to bond very much with the rest of his Brotherhood, and he doesn't really have a lot of interest in doing anything other than furthering the cause of the assassins. I get really inspired by stoic and dark characters like this, similar to Altair, similar to Bayek, similar to other characters in other worlds like Batman. I like the idea of this kind of like stoic, quiet badass who just wants to get the mission done. Because first of all, they're incredibly cool to play as, but second of all, it's a character that's very easy to empathize with once they become humanized through the story. Once they go through certain things, whether it's certain emotional challenges or they get confronted with something that forces them to act in a different way or compromise with the rest of the world, after being used to for years not compromising with the world. I think it just lends to a very interesting trope and a very interesting archetype of a character, especially because it allows a lot of place for interpretation. And I think that interpretation in Assassin's Creed is a huge reason why so many people have been drawn towards this franchise. So this man, in terms of his skill, would probably reach his prime around the late 1400s. He would be a contemporary to Ezio, kind of dealing with the recruits that Ezio sends over to China and trying to deal with the Templars over in China in that time period, which I think is a very interesting time period for the Templars to be operating in. The reason why I want to start with this old man is because I really love the Last of Us dynamic, and I imagine that a story told throughout 3 games, even if there are shorter games, is better than a big story told in 1 game, which is why I disagree that AC Origins is the same as the Ezio trilogy put together, because yes, in terms of hours of gameplay, we spent as much time with Bayek as we did with Ezio. But that time spent is not equal, because we have to wait in between installments. We see Ezio at different ages, with different gameplay in different cities, and we are told different stories that have different endings. With AC Origins, there's only one big story that has a one big ending, and there's no real continuation with that, especially when it's left on a cliffhanger. So I would want to divide Xiao Jun's story into a trilogy that takes its time to tell not just her story, but the story around her. And I want to start with this man, because the first game in this trilogy would only focus on him kind of coming out of his shell and learning how to cooperate within the Assassin Brotherhood. I feel like we can draw a lot of similarities to Altair and how this man would behave, and I think that there would be something in this story that requires him to change his ways and become more humble. And at the end of this game, the twist and the teaser for the second game would be that he has to recruit and train this young girl called Xiao. Xiao Jun was born in 1505. So, let's say that she's 10, 11, 12 years old when the game ends. She joins the Brotherhood, and he's tasked with kind of taking care of her. The kind of similar storyline or archetype that you can draw similarities to is Obi-Wan with Anakin Skywalker. I like the idea of like a reluctant mentor, similar to Joel and Ellie, or Obi-Wan and Anakin, where this mentor has to kind of deal with this new, talented, but kind of difficult to handle recruit. And this would be my ideal scenario for the second game. Because one big problem that you have with trilogies that follow a same story is that you lack gameplay innovation. I don't think the Ezio trilogy struggled with this, but I do think that it's something that you have to tackle. And going from the first game focusing on one character with these gameplay mechanics that we discussed, similar to Assassin's Creed Unity, going to a second game where you can play in a dual protagonist way, similar to what they're doing in Assassin's Creed Red, is a very interesting development. Reason one is because most people who have a problem with dual narrative protagonists or dual protagonist narratives is because they find that they don't have enough time to bond with one character or the other. This problem would be solved again by taking your time and spending one full installment getting to know one character, which would be the male character. And then in the second game, you could get to know Xiao Jun by playing as both of them and having different gameplay mechanics for either of them. For example, you could probably send Xiao Jun to do reconnaissance or to kill certain targets from afar, kind of like assassin recruit mechanic, and then when you're playing as Xiao Jun, you can command and use your mentor in other ways that make sense for the narrative. But the point being that you'd introduce two protagonists to play once you've already bonded to one, and once you want that gameplay to feel a little bit different. I think that this is the best way to introduce a dual protagonist narrative. I don't think that creating a new game in a new time period like they're doing with Assassin's Creed Red is the right way to do it, because I struggle to see how we'll bond to both characters, which is not something that I would struggle with in this game. And the second game would basically just be a Last of Us-esque story where the Assassin's Creed Brotherhood in China is kind of getting run down, getting overtaken by Templars, which actually does happen in Xiao Jun's actual canonical story. And by the end of the game, these two characters that have bonded over surviving this kind of like failure of the Brotherhood, this defeat of the Brotherhood by the Templars, have to leave China en route to Italy. Now, you wouldn't exactly reveal in the story that they're going to Italy, but I imagine that at the end of the game, the male character dies. There has to be a narrative reason as to why Xiao Jun went all the way to Italy to train under Ezio. I think that the one that they gave in the current canon is not as satisfying as I would want it, and I think that a man who was Ezio's contemporary, who communicated with him and his recruits, who is now training Xiao Jun, who dies and wants Xiao Jun to complete her training, would be a perfect response for him to point her in that direction and have her go to train with Ezio. It's pretty similar in some ways to the current canon and pretty different in other ways. But that would be the end of the second game, and the beginning of the third game would take place after Embers. So Xiao Jun has just left Italy and is going back to China. And this story would be relatively similar to what we have right now, of her trying to like rebuild the Brotherhood, take down the Templars that have taken over China, and kind of reinstill some sort of imprint for the Assassin's Creed in China. I think this is the trilogy that I want, not only because I'm desperate for a trilogy that follows one or two characters consistently over a few years, but also because I think that we need more interesting dynamics between protagonists that span multiple games, and that the character arcs also span multiple games. So this trilogy, I think for me, would be ideal, because not only does it give Xiao Jun the much deserved AAA game that I think she deserves, but it also frames it in a way where you can get invested and you can have a new poster child. I'm kind of exhausted of people comparing everything to Ezio and the Ezio trilogy, but at the same time, there really is just nothing like it, because Ubisoft really cared about Ezio. Ubisoft really took its time to build him to be a gaming legend. And I think that right now, one of the icons in the video game world is The Last of Us, because of that dynamic they have. The fact that they pulled it off in the TV show and in the game just shows how effective that dynamic is, of this kind of like pseudo-father and pseudo-daughter relationship that I would really love to see in an Assassin's Creed game, especially one with Xiao Jun, who's a character that I believe is so important to the lore that she really deserves all the attention and time that would come with a trilogy like this. So that's kind of like my rambling thought on the ideal trilogy that I would have regarding Xiao Jun, beginning with her mentor-to-be, kind of being Ezio's contemporary and working in China with Italian and Chinese recruits and all sorts of recruits, going to a second game where he basically has to train her and help both of them survive through the disaster that would be Assassin's Creed Brotherhood in China being defeated and run down, escaping China, heading towards Italy, and then him dying along the way to some sort of assault and her trying to complete that journey alone. The game ends the same with it Embers begins, with her taking off her hood and looking at Ezio asking to be trained. And then the third game takes off exactly after Ezio, her leaving Italy and going back to China to use this new training to kind of take over the Templars, which is quite similar to the story that we have in Chronicles, but ideally would be a little bit more fleshed out. I think that would have enough balance between the two protagonists to bond with both of them. It would have enough incentive to add gameplay additions throughout the games as you start changing between characters, and overall I just think it's something that Ubisoft should have done. So that's my thoughts. I'd love to know your thoughts, because most people just try and make a dream game and either say a dream setting or a dream gameplay style. But I'm really interested to see, if you've listened this far, what your ideal trilogy or at least one game would be in terms of story. What character story would you like to tell? What character would you like to work with? And in what situation would you put them in? If you like this video, consider subscribing. And if you want to watch another video, you can watch a video I do make where I analyze why we're so addicted to Assassin's Creed Unity, even though objectively it's not really a finished game. So you can watch that video now.